Okay, in this video we are going to build out our transaction endpoint. But one thing that I want to make sure to clarify first is that whenever we are working on our blockchain from now on, you should have our server running. And by that I mean you should be running the command npm start so that we can test our API and actually use it. Cool. So let's head over to our code and let's build out our transaction endpoint. So first of all, we can take out this example code that we had in from before. And what this transaction endpoint is going to do is it is going to create a new transaction in our blockchain. So in order to do that, we are going to use our create new transaction method that we built out in the first section. So let's do that now. In our post to transaction endpoint, we are going to say Bitcoin dot create new transaction. And this create new transaction method takes in three parameters: an amount, a sender, and a recipient, because that's the data that we need to create a transaction. So in our endpoint, we are going to assume that all of this data is being sent in with the request body from whoever is calling this endpoint. So the parameters that we are going to pass in to create new transaction will be rec.body.amount, rec.body sender for the sender's address, and rec.body recipient for the recipient's address. Cool. And as a result from this method, we get returned to us the block number that our new transaction will be added to. So we want to save this block number. So in our endpoint, we will say const block index equals the result of our method. Cool. And that's pretty much the meat of this endpoint. So all we want to send back to whoever called this endpoint is the block index. And we'll send it back as a note. So we will say res.json, an object that has a note that says transaction will be added in block, and then we'll use some string interpolation, and we'll use our block index variable right here. Cool. And that's it. So in our post to transaction endpoint, we are creating a new transaction by using our create new transaction method that's on our blockchain data structure. And then we are simply responding by saying the transaction will be added in block number and whatever block number it will be added to. Cool. So let's save this file, and we can test this endpoint by using Postman. So let's head over to Postman, and this is the endpoint that we want to hit right now. We want to hit our transaction endpoint that we just built out. And we want to make sure that it's a post request. Cool. So in order to send data in with our post request, we want to click on the body tab, which is the body of our request. Click on the raw selection and make sure that our text is in JSON format. And we're simply going to send in a JSON object right here, which will be our request body. And on this object, we will send all of our transaction data. So let's send in an amount of 300 Bitcoin, a sender that has the address of this string right here, and a recipient that has this address right here. Cool. So if you were confused before about what this rec body object is right here and how we are accessing the amount, sender, and recipient on this rec body, I just want to clarify that this rec body right here is simply this object that we are sending in with our post request. And you can see that we have access to the amount, sender, and recipient on this object. So that's where we get these values from. Cool. So now let's test this endpoint. So what should we expect to get returned to us when we hit this transaction endpoint? Well, we should expect to get the text, transaction will be added in block 2. Because there's already one block in our blockchain because we initiated our blockchain up here. And when we initiate our blockchain, we create a Genesis block, which is block number 1. So when we create a new transaction at this point, that new transaction will be added to the next block, which is number 2. Cool. Let's see if it works. Great. We got the text, transaction will be added in block 2. Perfect. And one other way that we can test to make sure that this endpoint worked correctly is we can check out our entire blockchain by hitting our blockchain endpoint. So when we hit this endpoint, we should expect to get our entire blockchain returned to us. And in that blockchain, there should be a single block, which is our Genesis block, and there should be one pending transaction, which is the transaction that we just created. So if we head over to the browser, let's try this out. So we'll hit localhost 3000/blockchain. Cool, perfect. So this entire outer object is our whole blockchain. And this part right here, this is our chain, and we have one item in it, which is one block, our Genesis block, which is this object right here. And we also have one pending transaction right here, which is the transaction we just created. Perfect. Our post to transaction endpoint is working just as it should.